Before we get to the episode, this episode is sponsored by the Italy guy, Naor Menninger's YouTube channel. Yeah, that's right. That's the same Naor that hosts this podcast. You should follow Naor throughout Italy as he goes on crazy adventures. He visits completely abandoned towns in the mountains of Italy, ghost towns that are just completely abandoned. He tries the best pizza, the pizza that was voted number 1 in all of Italy. Can you imagine? It's like eating the most amazing hamburger in all of America. And that doesn't make much sense, but he eats pizza out of a vending machine as well. He tries a pizza out of a pizza vending machine. He speaks fluent Italian, so he's able to talk to the locals and get kind of, inside information that no one else is able to get. It's an amazing channel. It's really cool, really wacky. All these crazy adventures. He explores an Italian town in Tuscany where supposedly you can buy an apartment for €1. So you want to check out that video and see if he finally manages to buy an apartment for €1. Check it all out on the YouTube channel, The Italy Guy. You don't want to miss it. This is Eitan Weinstein.
And I'm Naor Menninger. And you're listening to Two Nice Jewish Boys.
Last week, something happened in Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu, who already broke the record as Israel's longest sitting prime minister, did it again. And after Naftali, Bennet, and Yair Lapid overthrew him a year and a half ago, he made a historic comeback which left everyone speechless. Netanyahu took the country by a landslide in an outcome that none of the pollsters saw coming. But in the morning after the elections, as Netanyahu and his millions of voters celebrated in the small courtroom of Jerusalem District Court, things were as usual. The humongous trial of cases 1,000, 2,000, and 4,000 kept on going. Witnesses were examined by the defense and then by the prosecution. The state of Israel versus Benjamin Netanyahu. Charges of fraud and bribery. The trial will continue for years before a verdict will be heard, and that's even before the appeals. Very few people in Israel truly understand the complexity of the charges and the cases against Netanyahu, and Case 4000 is undoubtedly the most complicated of them all, and probably the most severe charges. It is also the most severe, the only one where Netanyahu faces charges of bribery, and many of his supporters believe wholeheartedly that this entire case is bogus. That is why a bunch of civilians, supporters of Bibi, decided to take it upon themselves to dive deep into the case and its 315 charges to prove that they are absurd and invalid. They call themselves Project 315. Today we have with us one of the initiators of this endeavor, Moshik Kovarsky, to talk about Case 4000 and take a deep dive inside. So buckle up. Thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited to have you on. How are you?
Good. Thank you very much.
So maybe we can start by telling us a little bit, give us the 30-second bio of Moshik Kovarsky.
Well, I'm 66 years old. I celebrated this week.
Mazel tov.
Mazel tov.
Thank you. I was born in Israel. I served in the military in the unit that is now well known. At that time, it was secret, 8200. And I was sent as part of my service to be 2.5 years in the States working in an American company with a bunch of other people, and brought the project back to Israel. Got released from the army, went into the high-tech industry. Before the army, by the way, I graduated math and computer science from Tel Aviv University. So after the army, it was a natural progression to go into high-tech, and I worked in a very interesting company called Optrotech for 8 years. Was the software manager, and then I founded my own company with a couple of partners. We worked really, really hard for 8 years and brought it into a successful exit in the Neue Market Exchange in Germany. And then I could retire. So I did a lot of hobbies and learning and etc. and a bit of politics in the beginning of the 2000s and behind the scenes, of course. And then 2010, we sold the company completely, and then I started some new ventures, one in the area of finance and one in the area of piano studies. And about a year and a half ago, I was called for duty for this project 315 by a dear friend, Guy
Reserves.
Levy.
Called for reserves.
Called for reserves, right.
From a dear friend named
Guy Levy.
Guy Levy.
Yeah.
And so where did really Project 315 start, and how was it born?
Yes, so to understand that, we have to understand a little bit the procession of the trial and how it all came about. So I'll describe this a little bit, otherwise the context is not there. So according to what we believe and what we described in numerous articles, the whole thing started after the elections in 2015, when Netanyahu was elected against all odds with a large majority. And it was an understanding within the left circles at that time that it won't be able to topple him using the popular vote. So instead, they went into a series of investigation and leaked information from the press to the legal authorities. And they had a common interest because Netanyahu was about then to revolutionize some of the issues about the legal system and the power that it accumulated and the media, and the way there's no freedom of opinion in Israel as far as the media, and it's all monopolized. So it created a counter-response, and they went into this investigation. In 2016 and 17, they worked really hard, invested hundreds of millions of dollars. I'm not exaggerating. This is the amount that was calculated based on the amount of people that worked on it. A whole bunch of investigators and lawyers were doing a fishing expedition to get something about him. And it all kind of matured in 2018 when they recruited 3 state witnesses from the closest circle of Netanyahu. At that time, nobody knew the background of how they were recruited. Now we know, after the trial has begun, we know the type of illegal means by which they were recruited, including extortions and stuff like that. But at that time, it was clear to them, I think, that once they recruited these 3 people as state witnesses, Netanyahu will not have a choice and will leave politics. And then probably the indictments against him would fizzle. But he stayed because he thought it was very important to push some things with Israel that he did in the years that follow. And then in 2019, they submitted an indictment pre-hearing, like non-final. That was just 40 days before the 2019 elections. And I think our assessment is that they were hoping that based on this indictment, including bribery, as you mentioned, he will lose the election. And then they'll get rid of him this way.
Pre-hearing is unusual, meaning usually you go to a hearing and then you...
Yeah, for a person of this stature, a person who is a public worker, etc., there is a hearing. He deserves a hearing before it goes to court, and then potentially they can dismiss the case. It doesn't usually happen, but shimua, as they say in Hebrew.
Mm-hmm.
But as you all recall, despite all the illegal leaks that happened in 3 months prior to the 2019 elections, it was tied. It was actually advantage for the right wing, but Avigdor Lieberman chose to leave the right wing bloc and go to the left, and then we were stuck with another election in September of 2019. After that, and that was another tie, and then after that there was the hearing, and the hearing was a sham because in the middle of the hearing the chief prosecutor decided that she will take off and go for a safari in Africa. She didn't really want to listen to everything Netanyahu's lawyers have to say. And Netanyahu recruited some senior legal expert to come and counter the accusation, and we'll talk about the accusation a little bit. And
the best in the country. The best in the country.
Yeah.
He took the best lawyers in the country.
Yeah, but he also brought some experts from the States that were supported by an opinion, for example, by Ellen Dershowitz.
Okay.
That actually said that the indictment of bribery is unheard of because it took as the gift that he got was favorable coverage in the media which is something politicians do every day, all the time, every time. And then after that, the trial was actually after the hearing, they submitted the indictment. Or actually, they started the trial right after the 2020 election in the middle of COVID. Worth mentioning that at the time there were accusations, I'm not kidding you guys, that Netanyahu created COVID in order to delay his trial. And people said that actually, yes. They thought at the time that it was all a plot, so he will avoid trial. And then the trial started with a pre-hearing. I mean, they were putting all the initial claims. And then as the result, the court sent them to correct the indictment. And with the corrected indictment, on January 2021, they submitted it. And inside this, they had to create, based on the court demand, an appendix that had 315 elements, whereas Netanyahu supposedly addressed the website in question, we'll describe in a minute, and asked them to give him favorable coverage, to take down an article, to add an article, etc.
So wait, so the original indictment didn't elaborate the instances.
Right.
That's what you're saying.
Exactly.
And when they, after years of that and huge sums of money they put into it, you're saying that they filed a lien case, a lien charge.
A lot of generalizations and stuff like this, and general statements, but no details.
And how did the judges?
But wait, let's rewind 1 second and lay down for listeners the charge itself.
Right. So
we're gonna talk today only about case 4000, guys.
Yes, yeah, that's the major one anyway. But just to complete this, after that we formed Project 315. After the election of 21, about April of 21, that's when Guy Levy approached me, and that's how the ball began. So let's talk about...
Because there were finally these 315
exactly
articles to go through.
Right.
Okay.
So let's describe what the indictment in 4000 entails. So it talks about a period that starts from December 2012 until January 2017, a period of 4 years and 2 months. And according to them, sometimes in December of 2012, in a dinner held in Netanyahu's house between him and his wife and a guy named Shaul Alovich and his wife. Shaul Alovich was quite a rich guy. He was the owner of a company, or a partial owner of a company called Bezek, which used to be the monopoly communication company of Israel, and it was privatized. So he was the owner of this company, or the holder of control in this company. This company had a lot of subsidiaries. One of them was a subsidiary that a subsidiary of a subsidiary that was a website called Walla. Quite marginal, not very important in Israel.
Israel's Yahoo.
Something like that, but less powerful.
But pretty, one of the biggest, let's say in the top 10 or 20 websites at the time.
Yeah.
And what you mean is that Bezek owned a company which owned Walla, basically, right?
A company that owned a company that owned Walla.
Okay.
And the claim was that during this dinner party, supposedly, they agreed that Shaul Alovich will make sure that Netanyahu get favorable coverage in this website of his, and in return, Netanyahu will do some regulatory actions that will help Bezek with its operation. That is the claim. And they are...
A bribe deal.
A bribe. That's the bribe. They never claim he got money or something that equal to money. They just claim that he got this favorable coverage, which later on they converted to something called
positive
exceptional access or something like this. And the word exceptional is important because exceptional compared to what? That's the question that one has to ask all the time. When you say something is exceptional compared to what? They never check that. And then they had to actually show three things in a bribe deal. They have to show what he got, what he gave, and the personal element, the fact that he was aware that he is doing it, the intent that he was doing it, one for quid pro quo.
Quid pro quo.
Quid pro quo. Quid pro quo.
I mean, he was giving it in order to get something.
Right.
Just important to say that, correct me if I'm wrong, I think, first of all, nobody here on this table is a lawyer or has official legal education. But bribe in Israel, the law specifies that it can be either money or something equivalent that is worth money.
Right.
So you don't need to prove that money actually changed hands according to Israeli law.
This is correct. But also worth mentioning is that this is definitely a precedent. That favorable coverage is considered that return. That was never done in Israel, or to that matter, according to Alan Dershowitz, anywhere else in the world. Because politicians get favorable coverage all the time, and then if you want, you can always catch them on bribery in this case.
But I want to understand, if the law states that it has to be either money or something equivalent to money that has monetary value.
Right.
So their claim must have been that the favorable coverage equals monetary value?
Yes.
Yeah.
They say that that the ability to, if they prove that Netanyahu got the ability, the superpower to tell Walla what to cover and what to drop, that is worth something. You can value this in money. It's like controlling a website, right?
Okay.
So when Guy Levy, my friend, when this 315 items appendix was published, read it, and when he ran into an item that he found out that he remembered that it was published everywhere, and he compared how he went to the internet and researched where it was published at the time that it mentioned there, and how it was published in different websites. He found out that it was published in 5 different places, and that the coverage in Walla was worse than the other places. So he said, what's exceptional about it? If this is a worthy newsworthy, then why put it into appendix? And then he said to himself, I want to check all the other 314 items, but it'll take me a lot of time. So he called me and he said, why don't we start a project? We'll get volunteers, and we'll ask each one to check 7, 9, 10, and we'll combine it all together. And for that, I need you, because you're good with data and you can combine it all into a coherent document. And that's how it started. We recruited 2 more people that were with us on the founding team, Dr. Adi Sabo and Moshe Malal, and we started working on this project. Very shortly, Guy is quite prevalent on social media, so he got about 50 people to help him from the beginning, and they all were very anxious to dive into this, and we gave them assignments. Each one got a portion, and they all went to work and brought us data, and we had to normalize it and rationalize it and put it all together in a template.
So let's talk about the data for a second, because al panav, how do you say in English? On the face of it, that it would seem that, a bunch of people who are going out there to help Bibi, they got other people who are Bibi supporters, and they read through some articles and decided, is this pro-Bibi or is this anti-Bibi? It, like, from a listener's perspective right now, they might say, well, obviously everybody just said, oh, those articles are anti-Bibi.
No.
So how was the data collected?
No, that's not what it checked. What we wanted to check is, first of all, what type of item is it? I mean, is it personal? Is it public? I mean, if the Prime Minister of Japan is visiting Israel and meet with the Prime Minister, this is not a personal item. This is newsworthy. And they also checked where else was it published. Was it unique to Walla, or was it published everywhere else? So that was the type of information. It's subjective information. We did not claim that it's pro or anti. We claimed where was it published,
but
and why.
Those parameters are relatively objective. Is it newsworthy or public versus private? Was it published elsewhere? There must have been some kind of qualitative measurement, though,
yes, but that wasn't the main thing. We wanted to. First of all, they found out amazing things. They found out that some of these items in the indictment were not true. For example, if the item said that a request was given to remove some article from the website, and it's still there, that's an obvious falsification in the indictment. it was always there. It was never taken off.
But I think we have to clarify because, I guess our audience understands by now what Bibi gets allegedly from this deal.
Right.
He gets this ability, this superpower to tell this huge website, that's the prosecution's claims, what to do, what to publish, what to not publish, etc. Okay. What's the bribery here? What did Alovich, the owner of Bezekwala, what did he get?
Right. So when we started, initially we didn't plan to go into that part because this is a complicated part. It involves regulations and companies' M&A. I mean, I know all this stuff. I know how to read balance sheets and stuff like that. But still, it wasn't our intent in the beginning. In the beginning, we just thought we'll research these 315 items and come out with data. And just to complete the picture, we also went further and checked what did the website did to other politicians, because that's another comparative measure. I mean, was it specifically favorable to Netanyahu? And surprise, surprise, we found out this website was much more favorable to his opponents and gave them the full treatment of pushing them in elections, etc. So it wasn't a pro-Bibi site. I mean, we brought numerous examples how, for example, in the elections of 2015, which was supposedly in the indictment the height of time of support for Netanyahu, the website was pushing very strongly the person who is now the president of Israel, Yitzhak Buzi Herzog. He was then running against Netanyahu in a party called Zionist Camp, and they got excellent treatment from Walla. This was the period of Netanyahu's visit in the U.S. Congress. Everybody remember in 2015 on March when he went to give a speech against the Iran deal. And the Walla website was very critical to Netanyahu on this accord and made sure that Herzog's voice will be heard loud and clear how he berated Netanyahu on going to do this. So all this was happening, and this was important information we thought we should bring to the public, because otherwise the picture is very slanted. Now,
let's because it was so data oriented. Out of the 315 that they laid down, what percentage would you say were actually in favor of their claim?
That was first of all we categorized it this way. We said how many of them really happened. About half didn't.
Meaning half they requested to remove something that wasn't removed. They requested to
add something, it wasn't added. Or they requested to post an article and wasn't posted. That was about half. Out of the other half, most of it, the vast majority, was not exceptional. It was like events that were published everywhere else or were just news items. And in most of them, Netanyahu wasn't involved at all. He had a spokesman that went and,
did his job, essentially.
Yeah, that's what all spokesmen do. They send like 10 pushes every day to the newspaper or to the website, and to many of them in parallel. And whatever catches, they classify.
No, not only that. They contact the editors.
Sometimes.
They put pressure. They ask. They threaten. All of them do it.
Of course. Sometimes it's like this. Sometimes it's just, sending it, send and forget.
Mm-hmm.
And many of them were this type. And Netanyahu wasn't even involved in their being published. But they attributed everything to him. We found a few of them that were exception. I mean, they only appeared in Walla. For example, Netanyahu and his wife spending time in the Kinneret and are surfing on, I don't remember the name of this type of surfboard. And that was kind of a favor to Walla to publish something, every website wants some exclusive coverage. So to say that this is a bribe is ridiculous.
No, but to also say that Bibi jumped through hoops in order to make regulatory favors to Shaul Alovich so he could make billions of dollars just so he would get an article about him and his wife at the Kinneret is
ludicrous.
Unheard of.
Now, what did he supposedly give in return? That's what you asked. So,
yes.
So here they had a problem because they had to space the events, the gifts supposedly that he gave over a period of 4 years.
Mm-hmm. And
And
3 ministers of communications.
Actually, 2. He was, when the period started, soon after, the communication minister was Gilad Erdan, who is now the ambassador to the UN, as everybody knows. And then he was replaced in 2014 when another guy, Gideon Saar, left the Interior Ministry, and Erdan was actually promoted to become the Interior Minister, which is highest than Communication Minister.
Mm-hmm.
And then Netanyahu temporarily, we were about to have an election, the 2015 election, so he temporarily held this Communication Ministry, which is another thing the indictment says, that he deliberately took this in order to help Alovich, which was totally refuted in court. And then after the election of 2015, he indeed became the communication minister. Netanyahu wanted to keep this portfolio. But as was testified in court, his main goal was the original goal that I mentioned, to open the media market to competition, which is severely limited in Israel. And that's why he took the communication ministry, and that was his main focus. Regulatory actions for Bezek was the least of his worries. It didn't interest him. It was again and again was testified in court. And then he was, when the investigation had begun in 2016, the ombudsman of the country said through the Ministry of Justice that he has to give up this post of communication ministry. Mm-hmm. And then another guy was appointed to the job, Tzachi Hanegbi. So the first 2 years, they didn't find anything. The time that Erdan was there, they didn't find any
He
action.
is a witness, though, no?
He is a witness, yeah, they're all witnesses. 338 witnesses.
We need to start Project 338.
By the way, we are now in the 20s, so we still have 20-something, yes. After a year and a half, we are a 20-something witness.
Is that unheard of for a court to even accept such a list of witnesses?
It was part of, when someone submit against you an indictment with 333 witnesses, you say to yourself, these guys are serious, I'll better retire. But he didn't. Mm-hmm. That was the bug in the system.
They will probably lay off some of those witnesses.
No, but I wonder how many times a case is brought with that. I mean, unless it's like a class action suit or, you know what I mean? But
yeah.
How many times is a prosecution against one individual brought with 338 witnesses?
It's not against one individual, for the record. It's against several.
Just think how much it costs us. Every one of us. You, me, everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So the first 2 years, as I said, I didn't find anything that he did. So I had to scrape something. Otherwise, what type of a bribe deal is it that started in 2012 and nothing happened until 2015? So they found 2 things. One was Walla, the website, which was a grandchild company of Bezek, had a child of its own called Yad Shtayim.
Mm-hmm.
It's a website for selling and buying, like
secondhand stuff.
Yeah,
like Craigslist, let's say.
Like Craigslist, exactly. So Yad Shtayim was very successful, and it was sold in the middle of 2014 to a German Axel Springer, which is a German publisher.
Mm-hmm.
And this deal was quite lucrative to Walla owners. And because there is some archaic rule in Israel that Bezek, since the time it was a very important company in Israel and held all the communication infrastructure, there is some clause that says that any action that Bezek does that involves buying or selling subsidiaries, etc., requires permissions from the Ministry of Defense, from the Ministry of bunch of approvals. At the end, the last signature has to be given by the Prime Minister.
Amazing.
So when Yad Shtayim was about to be sold, it went through all this chain of signatures. And at the end, they brought it to Netanyahu to sign because he's supposed to be, according to this. It probably went like this. They brought him to sign. He looked at it and said, everybody signed? They said, yes. And he signed. So now they hold it as something that he did for Alovich. Mm-hmm. That's the type of...
but isn't there, like when they sign those documents, they get a legal...
Of course.
So he got a legal,
that's
advice.
part of the signatures. The chief legal consultant is signing it, advisor, signing it to say that it's all correct.
The
and fine.
chief legal, meaning the
יועץ משפטי.
Of the ministry, not of the state.
Of the ministry.
Not, okay, because I was going to say it's the same guy who prosecuted
No,
him.
no, of the ministry in this case.
Yeah, sign.
Dana Neufeld.
And then
Dana
he ends up
Neufeld,
prosecuting.
Yeah,
Okay.
So that was the two things. This and another thing about bonds that were issued by Bezek. That was the two things in the first 2 years. But then they came to the big deal that supposedly he did for Bezek, and it goes like this. Bezek, one of its subsidiaries, was a satellite broadcasting company called, something like News Corp.
Cables, but
Satellite.
Yeah.
Right. So Yes was owned by Bezek 50%, a little less than 50%, and the other part of Yes was owned by a company that's owned by the same Shaul Alovich, who was the owner of Bezek. And he wanted for a while to sell his half, his personal half, to Bezek, where he was a partial owner, for a lot of money.
Sell it
To
himself, basically.
Sell it
Through companies.
to a company that...
One of those tricks rich guys do all the time.
Yes, but this is all checked by, the board of directors of both companies, the national authority, the SEC of Israel. They all check to see that there is no fraud to the stockholders, etc. This has nothing to do with the government. The government doesn't need to be involved in such a deal because it's between two private companies, except the law for Bezek. Bezek, again, is a company that has special rules. So the whole thing was requested by Bezek and Yes way back in 2014. In March of 2014, they issued a request. It was approved by the guy who was responsible for monopolies. He said it's okay. And then the Ministry of Communication at the time with Gilad Ardan and a guy named Avi Berger, who was his general manager, delayed it infinitely. They didn't want to do it, and Netanyahu said nothing on the matter. When Erdan, as I mentioned, was moved to the Interior Ministry, Netanyahu left Berger in office, the previous manager. If he really wanted to push something for Malovich, he would tell him, that was his authority, the next day go and I'll bring somebody that will do this.
Berger.
But he didn't. He stayed for another half a year, as long as before the election, and didn't do anything in the matter. In March 2015, right about the time of the elections of 2015, they decided, because Yes and Bezek were pressuring very hard, they decided to jumpstart a process of 90 days that will check by the National Council for Satellite and Cable in Israel whether this deal is good for the market in Israel. And that process,
just like in the Soviet Union.
something like this. And that check went for 90 days. In the middle of these 90 days, this guy Berger was replaced by another guy who was brought in by Netanyahu with the sole purpose to open the media market, which has nothing to do with Bezek and totally different market. And that guy, you know his name, Shlomo Filber. Shlomo Filber is the main witness. He was one of the persons that have become a state witness. And now we know how. But he was brought in and he invested a lot to learn the market, etc. And when he came, they told him, here, there's a process going on by the National Council of Cable and Satellite. They are now checking the deal between Bezek and Eurocom, the company of Alovich that holds Yes. And they will come with their conclusion at the end of the 90 days, which happened to be 2 weeks after he came to office. He said, okay, let's clear the table. Let's finish this. Whatever the conclusion will be, there's a statutory body. They can decide whatever they want. I have no control over that. And they decided that it's okay to pass this. And the thing was finalized and was brought again to signature by Bibi. So here, Bibi did an action for Alovich. This is the major one. This is they call it...
After an entire council approved it.
couple of counsels and legal advisors, and a lot of people looked into this, and he signed it. Their claim was that when Netanyahu met Shlomo Filber, and that's very important, the main pillar of the case was that very soon, days after Filber was nominated, sometimes in June of 2015, Netanyahu called him to what they said was the guidance meeting. During this guidance meeting, Netanyahu told him, according to them, with a hand movement, that he should not raise the prices of Bezek too much, and he should finish the Bezek yes deal. That's in the indictment, and that was a major part of the trial afterwards to prove whether this meeting actually has taken place.
But wasn't there also Filber didn't plan to do? There's something about the infrastructures of the internet. That's right. Another. Guys, we told you it's going to be complicated, but right. that's the case, because when he said allegedly, by the way, it's not they claim it. Filber testified it. He didn't testify, but in the interrogations, what's the word? In the interrogation, he said basically. He claimed that that meeting took place. We shall see what he'll say in the the court.
But then they proved in court that the day that they put inside the indictment, and Filber testified on it, that it was on a certain date, exact date, 1 or 2 days. And the lawyers of Netanyahu has proven using location data and using SMS text messages. They proved that it couldn't have happened during these 2 days. And the whole chain of events that supposedly this meeting have started fell apart the moment they showed that it couldn't happen this week, actually. And he said it didn't happen before I was nominated. And then they said that during this week, at the end of the week, he went to Alovich and told him that he talked to Bibi about it. Alovich denies. But if the meeting occurred after, then he couldn't have gone to Alovich or the week after he was nominated and told him that. So it kind of broke the whole thesis of the court, of the indictment, to the point that they came to court after it was refuted by the defense and said, we'd like to change the indictment now. We want to move the date to sometime else. And the court told them, no, you can't do that. It's already been set in the indictment, so you can't now change your mind and say it happened sometime else. You had a chance before.
You can't come after accusing someone of committing a crime under such and such conditions, say, no, actually it was...
in a different date with a different weapon.
Yeah.
But I think it's worth saying that in Israeli judiciary system, it's a Russian roulette, basically, and the fact that they won't be able... Even if the defense will prove that this meeting couldn't have taken place in that date, a judge can randomly come and say, okay, yes, you proved that it didn't take care, but I believe the state witness that it did occur some other time.
The truth is a gray thing. It's
they can come, like the judge can come and say, right, I'm not, they can say, I believe the state witness, and yes, we don't know the exact date, but I believe the state witness that it happened. So, which brings us to the question, why did Netanyahu is one of his closest people, Shaul Alovich, who was the CEO of the Ministry of Communications, who was a key figure.
No, Shlomo Filber.
Shlomo Filber, sorry.
Right.
I'm talking about Shlomo Filber. Why did Shlomo Filber sign a state witness against Bibi?
Right. So I'll answer that. But before we do that, let's explain the thesis of Shlomo Filber, that he elaborated a lot about it in court. And actually, he said it before he was even accused of anything. He said it on lectures that can be found today on YouTube. At the time, he was happy and didn't even think that he's going to get into these troubles. So when Shlomo Filber entered the communication ministry, as I said, Netanyahu told him, fix the media market, make it open and competition and competitive, and bring as many channels as possible. That's what I tell you. About the other part of the communication ministry, which is the infrastructure, do what you do best. I don't tell you what to do. Do what you do best to improve it. We are still like a Russian tractor from way back. We need to
Yes.
improve it. So Shlomo Filber said the future lies in fiber optics. Israel is very poor in cyber optics. Fiber optics, yes.
Yeah.
We need to improve the infrastructure of fiber optics, and it costs tons of money.
Mm-hmm.
The problem was that when he found out, he came that all the cellular candidates to do this are very cash poor, because a couple of years before that, the predecessor in the communication ministry, Moshik Kahlon, ran a reform that really made the cellular companies, bare bones. They fired a lot of people. They closed a lot of offices. It was very good for the consumer. Everybody was happy because the prices went down with the government dictate, and everybody was very happy. But they couldn't invest anything because they didn't have money from month to month. So the only two candidates that could have invested to do this infrastructure was the Bezek, who was the communication company, and HOT, which is the cable company. They had money, and Shlomo Filber wanted to invest.
And that's
billions.
the duopoly that controls wire infrastructure in Israel to this day. Like in Israel today, when you want to connect to the internet at your home, you have two choices: HOT or Bezek.
Well, today, no. Today you already have fiber
Not
from
really.
Cellcom, etc. Yes, you can.
Maybe
partner,
for Cellcom.
yes.
But I think they ride on the infrastructure, of Bezek and HOT.
No, they have their own.
Okay.
But at the time, Shlomo Filber designed a big reform, a really big reform, where indeed they will create the infrastructure with investment, and they'll have to sell it to third parties in certain prices. But he came to an office which was obsessed with another reform, which was quite outdated and not needed anymore, which is to make the wire telephony, the regular wire telephony, to have Bezek share it with other companies. And he thought that this is, who's talking on the wire phone anymore? We all talk on cellular. So he wanted to make a deal with Bezek and HOT to give back some of the things that were required in the past that they thought as a big problem, and instead have them invest tons of money in fiber optics. And that was the big deal that he was doing. Now, the indictment looks at it at the tunnel vision. From all this reform, they took only the part that he wanted to alleviate Bezek. They don't look at all at what he promised HOT, which was something similar in another area. And they don't look at all at what he wanted to get in return from Bezek. So when you strip all the other parts, what are you left with? Shlomo Filber came to do good by Bezek in the dictate of Netanyahu. They got the article about Sarah and Bibi in the Kinneret. That's basically the chain of evidence that they brought here. That's exactly how the indictment look. And they keep putting these sentences. Shlomo Filber has designed this canceling the duty of mutual access between companies at the time that the accused Netanyahu was receiving an article in Walla.
Favorable coverage
in Walla.
Okay, but why did he sign the state witness deal then?
Okay, so why did he sign the state witness? So
Google, I have a Google Assistant, and it woke up from my okay. Yeah, shut up, Google.
So Shlomo Filber is really the tragical hero of this whole thing. Fortunately, he's doing well right now, much better, but no one wants to go through what he went because of his relative closeness to Netanyahu. So 2015, he was brought after an illustrious career in different things. He ran a very successful campaign for Netanyahu in 2015 in the election. And then a couple of months later, he was recommended by a friend to become the communication ministry general manager under Netanyahu. And he started his job on June 2015. At first, everything seemed rosy. He went on doing this reform. He worked really hard on it with the people in his office. Trouble started at about October of 2016, year and 3 months after he started. He issued the actual paper that delineates this reform and sent it to Bezek and to HOT. And that's when people inside the communication ministry that, I will not mention names and I will not go into much details, but there is a potential that they were connected to other companies, competitors of Bezeq. And they went and leaked this to the press, that something really awful happening here and Shlomo Filber is doing things for Bezeq.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, there was already press coverage about the stuff that Netanyahu gets from Walla.
Mm-hmm.
That was a year earlier in a famous article that started it all that Gidi
Haaretz.
Weitz wrote in Haaretz in October 2015.
Mm-hmm.
So Shlomo Filber continued to work even though he was doomed already. And he worked at that time, Netanyahu was not involved in the communication ministry anymore because he was forbidden from doing anything like this by this ombudsman. So the minister was Tzachi Hanegbi. He coordinated with him the actions. And then he sent a letter to Bezeq, that was his demise, when he sent it at the end of 2016, that told Bezeq that
Filber sent a letter.
Filber sent a letter to Bezeq and said that they will, if they invest such and such, they will be exempt from some of the things like the separation between the company and its subsidiaries. And that kind of created the havoc.
Why?
Because they summoned immediately a hearing in the Knesset. It was like a court-martial.
Mm-hmm.
They told him that what he did was wrong, and basically the ombudsman went into an action. Half a year later, mid-2017, to make story short, he was arrested. He was arrested
For this letter?
for basically, yes, for doing things for Bezeq, and he was, because supposedly the letter was used by Bezeq to mislead investors in the companies. Bezeq, following the letter, Bezeq published, I'll explain. The letter...
Yeah, this gets really complicated. Okay.
Yeah, the letter said that Bezeq is exempt from, that Bezeq will be able to combine its operation with its subsidiaries without a hearing. That was the mistake, supposedly, without a hearing.
Mm-hmm.
Bezeq sent a message to the stock market. Everybody jumped that it's premature. The next day, it was corrected that it's not without a hearing, but that was enough. That was misleading investors, even though there was no trade or anything.
By Bezeq.
By Bezeq, based on Filber's access. So,
And that's
Was
enough.
there an impact on the stock?
no.
And that's enough to indict him?
They went on indicting him. In mid-2017, he was investigated in the Security and Exchange Commission in Israel. Him and people from Bezeq, the general manager of Bezeq, Stella Handler, and others, were all
So they weren't investigated by the police. They were investigated, but there is this regulatory forum which
Yes.
has strong power
Yes.
to indict, but it's a regulatory forum that is responsible on the markets.
All right.
Like the SEC.
And we found out during the trial that already during this investigation in June of 2017, he was under the impression, based on what was told to him, that they're not looking for him. They're looking for someone above him. And that someone above him was obviously, he said, I knew that they're looking for Bibi. So they wanted him to implicate Bibi in the matter. And he didn't give it to them at that time. He didn't agree to be a state witness at that time. Even though he was investigated, he was removed from the ministry. He was on absent without pay. And in November of 2017, they told him that he is going to be indicted on this matter. By the way, all these indictments were later on totally dismissed. They're not there anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So he
Not
said,
against him, but
not
from
against him
the
and not against all the
same-
people from Bezeq as well. It was all finished, cleared with some arrangements. No, doesn't go to court.
Mhm.
And he thought, okay, I'll face these indictments. We'll see what we'll do. And then 3 months later, he was arrested again, this time by the police, by the elite unit of the police, Lav 433. And they took him for investigation. I mean, the usual drill, knocks on the 6 o'clock in the morning, search warrant on the house, taking him like a criminal to full day's investigation and arrest. And he said, but you already investigated me, and I already gave you the answers. And I said, no, it's another thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're not saying that you just did something for Bezek which was illegal. Now we're saying that you did it because you're a messenger to deliver a bribe. The bribe action that Netanyahu did. You were the bribe messenger. And that's why you are investigated now. And that time he said, I realized that that's it. I cannot escape this.
Why?
Because they're after me. Until I give them Netanyahu's head, they will not let me go forever. And me and my family are destroyed.
Yes, but if the case is so ludicrous, he could have fought to prove his innocence.
Yeah, but easy to say, easier said than done, because when you sit there in the investigation rooms and you are isolated from the outside world, and the
You
investigators...
don't have lawyers with you?
No. In Israel, you're not allowed to have a lawyer during investigation. I know, it's one of the bugs in the system.
Bugs.
Yeah.
Sounds like a...
Maybe a feature.
Like a
So
really
what
shitty
we see in
feature.
a Hollywood movie, I demand to see my lawyer.
Not in Israel.
Here they laugh at you. But an evil laugh.
And then they sit in front of him and they show him selective information, like they show him, you know, that all the time that you were hard at work and thinking you're doing good by the country, there was a nefarious plot above your head between Alovich and Netanyahu. They basically threw you under the bus. And the investigator sits and behind him like 6 big folders and said, all this is full with messages between Netanyahu and Alovich, how they are planning to have this deal. And you didn't know.
No, I didn't know.
But they don't
What's
show
the
it.
problem say? No, I didn't
But
know.
it's a good...
So you're going to stay for 2 weeks. We're going to
Yes.
send you to a special jail. We're going to
Yes.
strip naked you. And we're going to...
Sounds good so far.
No, but seriously, it is hard
It's
to
fun.
believe
We're laughing
that...
about it. It's
yeah,
not
yeah,
funny.
of course.
No,
of
but
course.
it is hard to believe that someone who is convinced of their innocence, and again, this is from a place of naivety, but someone who's convinced of their innocence and is being persecuted, not prosecuted, will stand up to that. They'll say, well, I didn't, like, you know, it is very... קשה לקבל את זה.
But
it's
Eitan
hard
is
to...
losing his... Okay,
It's
guys.
hard to under... yeah.
He woke up at 4 a.m. He has a baby.
No, but it's hard to
I'll
understand.
explain.
You know, to fathom that I like if I was accused of murdering someone.
Yeah, like
It's
Harrison
hard
Ford
to say
in the
that I
classic
would be like,
movie.
you know, yes, I did.
But this is a gray area, because when you do regulatory actions, if someone comes to you and tell you very authoritatively that what you did was wrong, you're not an expert on every minute details of the law about it. So they convince you that what you did was a breach of trust.
But you have a lawyer.
Not next
you
to you.
don't.
No, but you wait. You say nothing, and then you consult with your lawyer.
Right.
You ask him. No, isn't it like the most basic thing?
So
You
we
ask him,
found
do they
out-
have a file against me?
So we found out in the court that when the lawyer, the 2 kinds of lawyers, the one that represents state witnesses and the one that don't.
Mm-hmm.
Some lawyers say, I don't want to go with the state witness. If you decide to admit, I don't want to be your lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
So in another witness in the case, Nir Chefetz had a lawyer that told him, don't admit anything, you didn't do anything wrong. Don't admit and don't become a state witness. So what did they do? They tried to convince him to change a lawyer,
Yeah.
which is
They
another
is the police.
felony. Another felony because
And they tortured him.
the Nir
Yeah.
Chefetz, the other state witness,
Not this case though.
yeah, it's
He's
case
also
4,000.
in 4,000.
Of course.
Ah, okay.
Nir
okay.
Chefetz was supposedly the one
He
that
was the go-to guy, right?
he was the one that,
go-between.
that actually the spokesman. He is the one that sent the messages to Walla
Yes.
and asked them to be published as a spokesman.
Mm-hmm.
So he was really tortured. He was held for like 2 weeks in a cell. And with fleas and with starvation and without medicines, and he was physically and mentally abused, including a special investigation trick which
He's under
Censor.
Yeah, under censorship.
We're not allowed to say?
we can say what we can say, because not everything, but there was a special thing that was involved. Mekorevet, how do you say it?
Someone who close to him.
Someone who close to him.
Very close.
That was brought under false pretenses to the investigation unit so he would see her, and based on this he will turn to be a state witness.
Or else his family will be
Aware
in
of
jeopardy.
their closeness.
Yeah.
Destroyed. It's destroyed.
Mhm.
So,
But back to Filber. What did he consult with his lawyers before he signed the plea deal?
first of all, they turned him to become a state witness, and then they have him meet his lawyers and basically iron out the details. And during this meeting,
Closer to the mic.
during this meeting between the police and Filber and the lawyer, surprise, nothing is recorded because there was a power failure.
The
In
power
one-
went off.
Only in one room in the investigation unit, because all the other rooms investigation continued as usual. But in this specific room there was a power failure. The recording machine stopped working. Nobody knows what went on between the lawyers and the police and Filber.
Didn't he get free time alone with his lawyer?
Yes.
And do we know what his lawyer advised him?
Well, he already came to the lawyers in a sense saying, get me out of here, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be a state witness. The question was, what went on during the power failure? Supposedly, and that's just an assumption,
Mm-hmm.
building the story. I mean, you want to be a state witness? Bring us material. What if I say, yeah, I want to be a state witness, but I don't have anything to give you?
Mm-hmm.
So let's build some things. Let's build a guidance meeting. Let's build another conversation on the phone. Find for us things that we can build into the indictment that showed that Netanyahu was truly involved. And there were 3 such events in the indictment. One of them was the guidance meeting. The other was the update call. And the third one was the reprimandation call. That was the 3 things that are held in the indictment that supposedly show how Netanyahu guided him to do these things for Alovich, how Netanyahu followed to see if it's going correctly. And the third one, he called him to reprimand him that something is not done right.
So just again, guys, like we said in the beginning, to prove and to have Netanyahu to get him sentenced for the alleged crimes, it's not enough to show what Netanyahu got from Alovich.
And what he gave.
Nor what he gave. You need, those 2 are not enough. You have to show intent. You have to show
That he was the one to
he
give.
knew that he is acting in this relationship of bribery, allegedly. And this whole thesis is based on the state witness. So without the state witness, Filber, they have nothing.
Right.
And Nir Chefetz, because Nir Chefetz was the one that took out the actions, right? Filber is the one who took out the regulatory actions, and Nir Chefetz is the one that send the messages to get the favorable coverage.
Exactly.
So
But let me give you an example of what happened with this update message, because this is really funny, and that shows how good the lawyers of Netanyahu are. They're really top-notch. So Filber said, one time, out of the blue, Netanyahu called me and said, what's going on with Alovich? Is it progressing? That was the original, and that seems really, bad for Netanyahu. Why would he do that suddenly, calling?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I remember this call. I was on my way to Jerusalem, and I got a call, and I stopped, and I remember where I stood next to the office with next to a tree, etc. And it happened in 9 a.m, etc., etc., etc. It sounded very vivid.
Mm-hmm.
So they went and went through all his call diary when he got calls from the Prime Minister office. And they found out the date. He didn't remember the date, but they found out was the only date that this conversation could take place. The defense did.
Mm-hmm.
And then they went and checked and saw that a couple of days earlier, there was an article in Globes, which is an economic newspaper, that said that Netanyahu is going to cancel some limitations that Bezek has. I don't have to. Now, when this article was published and it was brought to Netanyahu, he says, why does it say this? I didn't even do anything like this. So he called him to find out why was it published, because he didn't do it. He doesn't know what it is. That was the call.
And Netanyahu is the Minister of Communications back then.
At the time, beginning of 2016, he was still, yes.
And Filber is the CEO of the ministry.
Right.
Like they talk all the time because...
So Filber said this article in Globes was false.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't really true. So they asked him, is it possible that Netanyahu called you to say why they're publishing false when it didn't really happen? He says, yes, that's what it probably was. The state witness now say it wasn't like Netanyahu called him to push him to do this. It's Netanyahu calling surprise to find out why something false was published when he wasn't even involved in this process.
But Filber, sorry, one more question. Filber didn't go yet to the stand, right? Or am I mistaken?
Of course
he did go? I forgot already.
Started on March and he ended in July.
So he's done his part already.
He's done
I forgot all about it.
He's done his part.
Wasn't there a bit where he was maybe going back on his word and he was actually speaking out in favor of the defense? Like his testimony
That's, for example, what I was describing in this incident. But he testified, with dread, because at any given time, the prosecution could have, at any given time during the direct examination, they could have declared him a hostile witness. And in this case, his agreement about being a state witness would have been cancelled. And he would be exposed to being indicted.
For what?
For lying.
For lying? Internal inside information.
That would be a hard case to prosecute.
Exactly, because all the other counterparts, the charges were dropped already.
Okay.
By the way, his agreement includes also money that was confiscated to him that they will release only when they're happy with what he testifies. That's in his agreement that was published.
Bunch of thugs. Anyway, so okay, I have to say, I find it hard to it's hard to believe. Everything that you're describing is just so fathomable, and it's even harder to believe that out of this whole system that is chasing Netanyahu and that is after Netanyahu, and you said hundreds of millions of dollars, which must equal at least hundreds of people.
Oh yeah,
investigators, and that there's no defectors. That nobody came up and said, "Hey, they're
the king is naked."
Yeah, these guys are crazy.
Well, a lot of the investigators, and some of them testified in court, many of them don't see the whole picture. They were given, a single task like break Nir Hefetz and get him to say what we want him to say.
They're just doing their job.
There was a funny part where, the investigation, as I said, happened during 2018. The indictment was submitted, the first one, before the hearing, in February 2019, a year later. Okay? So, in between, the indictment was changed from, as we mentioned, from favorable coverage, because there wasn't any, to unusual excess, or exceptional excess.
Mm-hmm.
So when they interviewed the investigator in court and asked him about these events in 2018, they asked them, did you try to investigate Nir Hefetz about exceptional excess? He says, what is exceptional excess?
Yeah.
the investigator said, what is he is the
They're
one
not
that was
synced with the new terminology, the new speak.
Right.
They're still with the old speech.
So the lawyer said, I asked myself also.
Wow, that's incredible.
So,
but is there nobody that came out from the prosecution and from the side that is chasing Netanyahu that said with information about how?
No, they keep a united line because it's really the spirit come from above, and admitting the many violations that happened during this investigation is like going against the company, going against the.
The capo dei capi.
Is there evidence is there evidence, like hard evidence of a conspiracy, or hard evidence of people saying, we need to get him no matter what?
No, I wish there was, but there are some evidence, as was opened lately by a guy named Moshe Saada, who was the head of the investigative unit of the police. He now tells he went rogue, as
Not
they
of
say.
the police.
Investigative unit of the police, Machash.
Yes, he was in Machash.
Yeah.
Yes.
So he went rogue, and he came and told what happened during the time that they had information from investigators that says some illegal things are happening during the investigations.
Mm-hmm.
And he wanted it to be investigated, but nobody wanted to listen because it was, again, there are more important things right now.
One of the problems in Israel is that the unit that investigates policemen sits under the chief prosecutor, who is the same guy responsible for indicting prime ministers, for example, and he works with the police
Right.
So all the investigations, again, in this case, for example, were held in collaboration between the police investigators and the prosecutors from the chief prosecutor's office. And the guys who were responsible to investigate policemen are also under the same boss. So there's a
conflict
of interests here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not to mention the fact that the guy who was the chief prosecutor, not the chief prosecutor, but the head of the general, what's the GA, or how do you call him?
The Attorney General.
The Attorney General. At the time, had an open case against him, basically, in the police
You're talking
units.
about Mandelblit.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he's the guy who has to decide in the end to file the indictment.
Yeah, there's a lot that went on, and my point is that it wasn't only a conspiracy of like left against right or something like this. It's all about preserving power.
Mm-hmm.
These are tremendously strong units, both in the police and the prosecution. They believe that they can topple governments, and eventually they did in this case.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what makes the return now of Netanyahu that you started it so momentous, because it's against all odds, really.
Mm-hmm.
And they believe that this power is for the good and the enlightened one. They don't think they're doing bad for the country.
Mm-hmm.
They think they're doing good for the country.
They call themselves the sons of light.
Yeah.
The sons of light against the sons of the
The
darkness.
enlightened one.
Yeah.
The enlightened one. And they believe they're doing good, but it's really bad that you have an unchecked organization that can put its heavy hand on top of the scales of politics, which is exactly what happened here.
Do you believe that those trials will reach the end?
Look, it doesn't do anybody any good. It did terrible for the country. It created the polarization that is totally beyond the pale. It destroys the trust that people have in the public authorities, where some of the people there are good, but they suffer because nobody believes anymore. Or I said a large part of the population doesn't believe in the legal system because of what happened here. And the best thing will be if new, fresh guys, people of high esteem, will be appointed to head the legal system in Israel: Attorney General, Prosecutor General,
And drop
And
the
And the
cases?
police.
and the police.
And drop the case?
Examine the case.
Examine the case.
Let's say we suspend it. We
Like
look-
the Ta'irada.
Ta'irada was dictated by court. I'm
Mhm.
talking about the court cannot stop the trial at this point. It doesn't
Mhm.
have the authority to do that. Only from a certain point of view, which is quite extreme, it is protection against justice, defense from
Mhm.
justice, which was submitted by Alovich lawyers.
But they always say no to that claim.
Yeah. So, but the people who can pull the indictment, in a moment's notice, is the prosecution. Now, I wouldn't say drop it. I say we suspend it for a moment. We're going to examine the data again. We'll examine everything we did. Was it legal? Was it correct? We'll examine everything that came up in court. All the things that showed to be totally untrue based on the case. And
All
maybe,
the illegal things that allegedly...
right. And maybe based on this, they will say, we decide to close
dismiss
this, to dismiss it.
But the judges need to approve that.
No,
No?
no, that's
But-
totally.
Yeah, what's so frustrating about this case is the fact that you open the news yesterday and you see a guy beating another man on the Ayalon with his helmet, and you hear, I saw a tweet today about a guy who was convicted of rape,
Today.
raping a 14-year-old girl,
Ten.
and he got
10
10-year-old girl,
Yeah.
and
You got three years plus two...
To parole, yeah.
to
Yeah.
parole, so he'll be released after 5.
Terrible.
And the guy who stabbed Shira Banki in the Jerusalem parade was, known to the cops and was released. And there's just zero criminal justice. We're walking the streets of the wild, wild west, where you could literally be beaten to death, stabbed to death, run over, raped, assaulted. And I really don't feel safe for myself, for my family, for my wife, for my young daughter that was just born. And the police is spending hundreds of millions of dollars investigating
Exactly.
the prime minister.
That was so infuriating, because there's a lot more glory in investigating a prime minister, and that's I think how they look at it, because there's no other explanation why they
It's a good
build
skull
it
to
up
have on
so-
your belt.
Yeah.
It feels like
For,
Gotham.
for some people it's like this. I talked
Feels
to
like?
It feels like Gotham City.
Gotham
like
City,
it's
yeah.
so
I-
corrupt.
I talked to one of the investigators that wasn't involved in this case, but was involved in previous case, and he's retired now. He's a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked him, but he said, the lawyer that goes into the room, all he wants to is to bring the scalp for his boss. He doesn't care, prime minister, not prime minister.
Yes.
He got the task.
They're soldiers.
He wants to do it. He wants to do it the best way. Breaking the witness, that's his goal.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't care. And then his boss wants to be promoted. And the best way to be promoted is to bring this to a successful indictment.
Mm-hmm.
And then the lawyers that prosecute the case in court, they also want to get promoted.
Yes.
But then on top of all this, on top of the system, there's a person who started it all, and we won't mention names, that he probably bears most of the responsibility for this going on. And then there are some people who are, as you mentioned earlier,
Why? Shainitza? We could say Shainitza is the...
if you want to.
No, yeah.
And then there's a person on top of him that
He was,
admitted,
he was the chief prosecutor.
Yeah.
It's not a secret.
and he's retired now. And we all continue to
What, you're afraid of
suffer from his
Shainitza?
ways.
Moshik, seriously? Wow. Should I be afraid?
Look, it's a scary environment to live in, because next thing you know, you could be slapped with defamation.
Those people at the top of the system, their dream is to become Supreme Court judges.
Exactly. And that can go very well with the brancha, the group that they belong to.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't analyze the reasons. We know the facts, and the facts are really scary. The facts of this case and the way that it came to court, and we didn't even start talking about the other 2 indictments, which have nothing to do with the 4,000, and they're even more ludicrous. So,
But if the trial were to proceed, do you trust the judges to make justice?
unfortunately, not fully, because this has become a zero-sum game for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Netanyahu's acquittal is somebody else's
Demise.
yeah, and this is real danger, because they know that if he gets acquitted, the whole system is going to be indicted, and they don't want it, because this system is the flesh and blood, the judges too. So how can they acquit and bear these consequences? That's why they were trying so hard, to get into a plea bargain. But their initial demand was a non-starter. Netanyahu was not ready to leave politics.
So is that not? And I think we got to wrap it up after this. But because the conservative in me wants to say there's bugs, there's even big bugs in the system, like you mentioned before, and we need to solve them. But to look at the system and say there's something systematically wrong, we got to rip it down and start anew, is too extreme. But when you say something like that it's a zero-sum game and the system is going to defend itself, and in the end we might have a prime minister indicted on trumped-up charges of nothing and having been thrown out of power because of those charges.
Well, let's be optimistic. I mean, nobody would predict a year and a half ago that Netanyahu will become prime minister again. True?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was
Also a month ago.
He was eulogized. He was eulogized by so many.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, here we are. So let's say, I think the solution, forget for a moment the Netanyahu trial and how this will end up. The solution for the bugs, if you call them in the system, is first and foremost to create an effective, how do you say it?
Reform?
No. פיקוח.
Regulation.
Regulation, ביקורת.
Oversight.
Foresight. Oversight over the prosecution.
Mm-hmm.
That's the main thing. Oversight with teeth, as we say. Oversight that can actually punish people. And of course, the question is who this body will report to. Obviously, not to the prosecution. So I think for the Knesset, and it should be operated and keep, just like we have one for the police, or a true one, not the one we have right now, which is kind of castrated, but a true one that will cover both the police and the prosecution. But we can even start with something very basic. Have the lawyers that work for the prosecution give an hourly report what they're working on and make this report open. What file are they working on? Of course, within security.
You'll have a problem with the union.
No, it's important because then you would find out how much was investigated in this case compared to other cases. And that's a simple solution, relatively. Just like lawyers, in private offices, they come to work, they end the work at the end of the day, they type in what files they work today. That's used for charging their clients. So we are the clients. We want to know what they're working on.
Yeah,
absolutely
sounds
reasonable.
fair.
Yeah, that's like a simple solution that will get them,
That's a
straighter.
data man's
More
approach.
honest.
You want data.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Moshik, thank you so much for
Thank
the
you very
time.
much.
And it was fascinating, and I learned things I didn't know.
A ton, yeah. Thank you.
Are you on social media?
Of course.
How can people find you?
Moshik Kovarsky, just in English.
With an I at the end.
Y.
With a Y.
Y at
Okay.
the end. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I have approaching 20,000 followers on Twitter.
Nice. Guys,
And
follow
then-
him on
and,
Twitter.
And there's Project 315.
Right. We have a YouTube channel. Just look on YouTube, Project 315, and you'll find many, many videos that we did on the subject.
It's all in Hebrew.
Most
though.
of them in Hebrew.
Yeah.
I did a good podcast with Caroline Glick. So in a podcast, I think it's number 30-something. It's in English.
Nice. So look up Moshik Kovalsky and Caroline Glick, and you can, after you listen to this episode, of course.
Of course.
And then you can find that in Project 315. If people want to help, can they help out on the website? Is there donations, or are you guys not looking for donations?
We do it sporadically. We just
okay.
did something. Guy Levy arranged something for the new season of videos that we put up.
I see.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very
Good
much.
luck.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye
guys.
guys.